Thanks for coming to Keep Austin Agile 2025. This is the Big Tech's Room, and our third session today is Product Leaders, What's in Your Way by Randy Hale. We'll save 10 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A. Randy Hale here is an empathetic change catalyst with expertise in product operating model transformation and
other stuff.
Product leadership, enterprise lean agile transformation, business and product strategy, business management leadership, and organizational and strategic portfolio transformation. He's skilled in driving organizational, cultural, and process change for startups to Fortune 100 companies, delivering improved engagement, faster time to market, and enhanced productivity. Take it away.
All right, thank you, Ian. Thanks, everyone. All right, so I'm going to do a little tee-up on the origins of how did this talk ever become a thing. It starts literally almost 21 years ago, I would say, where I was in a product leader role, and within my organization, I had a peer who made the strategic decision that in order to optimize for a whole bunch of things that were not the most important thing I wanted to optimize for, that we were going to go all in on Prince2 methodology. How many people know what Prince2 methodology is? How many people know what super hardcore waterfall methodology is? That's what it is. And I was kind of unique because I have Agile experience predating the manifesto, working for a startup back in late 99 to early 2001. And that was really frustrating. I had these constraints, I had nothing to do with it. Now I have these constraints. I've got to document all these requirements. I have to have reviews if I want to change requirements. I'm like, I know better. This is not how this is supposed to work. But I would say I gently challenged, like, why are we doing this? But the decision was outside my control. Fast forward 10 years forward from there, which is about 10 years backwards from where we are right now. Leading my first really big transformation. It was an $18 billion company, and we were a few months into the transformation when it became really crystal clear that technology and engineering leadership really just wanted to do the bare minimum, to just check the boxes, to be able to sort of look at the process and look at their checklist and say, the checklist it's now an Agile checklist. But they didn't really understand what needed to go into it, what was going to actually make it work. And so I had a conversation with one of the market-facing leaders that we were working with, and I said, look, here's what's happening. I want you to know what good looks like because you're probably not going to get it. And so I went to her because I had empathy for her as a product leader. And I basically coached her and helped her sort of call out where things weren't happening the way they really should in support of her needs. More recently, about a year ago, I had another conversation with a product leader. And in this conversation, I basically framed it up. I said, here's my perspective. And this is pretty indicative of what we're going to cover in the rest of the talk. I said, my perspective is product leaders are beset upon on all sides by a bunch of very well-intentioned peers, collaborators, stakeholders who are doing everything in their power to try and optimize for something that is making the product function's job harder. And that stuck with me. And then throughout the rest of that conversation, I heard all the things that I would normally hear, and we'll cover those things. So that's really the premise of the talk is, what are we optimizing for? Let's take a look at our system, and how do we optimize it for a better product function? What if the system isn't broken? It's just succeeding at the wrong thing. And so that's why I love the question. I ask it a lot. What are we optimizing for? Often, we're in a situation where we're optimizing for, some rigorous control or some review, and, there's some form of risk that we're trying to mitigate for. Meanwhile, like we're mitigating these micro risks inside of our system, and the big risk, that market-facing risk, it's about to like hit us right between the eyes. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on the right things. One of the things I've used for a long time is this super simple model. And so I encourage you, if you're having a conversation about how are things going, like where do we have challenges, where do we have pain points, draw these 5 shapes and 4 arrows on a whiteboard and just start talking. It's been one of the most effective things I've ever used. I use it with executives, leadership teams, and literally we'll just put these 5 shapes up there and say, tell me where it hurts, where do you have challenges? And it's amazing what comes out. In my opinion, it's way more powerful to have this conversation than to go do a really detailed value stream analysis. So simplifying it, just getting folks to take a step back and really reflect on where does it feel bad? Where does it feel like there are unhealthy tensions? Quick poll, how many of you were here before lunch for Pete's talk? All right, like maybe about half. All right, so confession, Pete's my mentor going back, 9-10 years. We worked together, so sort of by dumb luck or just from like our osmosis over the years, I like to use tensions a lot too. I'm using them in I think a complementary way to how Pete was framing it. So hopefully for those of you who are in his talk, this is a build on his talk. I do want to quickly just hand poll here, say, how many of you work for a startup? How many of you would you say work for an enterprise? How many of you are consulting and work for all of the above? All right. That gives me a little clue on how I can frame some of things. So every organization, every system has different optimization tensions, very aligned with Pete's talk. But here's some of the most common ones. The first bullet, it's the first bullet because it's my favorite bullet because it happens all the time. Financial control over speed and flexibility. And I've got a story later where I'll talk about that. Delivery speed versus discovery times. Anybody been in that situation where we measure success by how fast we're hitting the different toll gates and the milestones, and whether or not the thing that comes out the other end and gets put in the hands of our customers and users actually solves their problem or not, that's not really our concern. So control culture versus autonomy, right? All of these things, there's always a tension there, and your current environment is really dictated by sort of how these levers, as it were, are set. And so we're going to talk about how do we bubble these up? How do we bring them to the surface, and how do we talk about them in a productive way? All right. So a lot of these things, they might come out, like if you do the idea to impact cycle and have a conversation around it, that's one way, but it's things that you're gonna hear probably on a day in, day out basis. It's that innocent comment made in an all hands maybe, or it's some crucial conversation that you're a part of, but words have a lot of power, and we can take these things and really try to take a step back and say, what is this telling us about our system? So often, we sit in the middle of our system and we take it for what it is. We assume that all of these constraints around us they're hard and fast things that we can't change, that we can't influence, that we can't even find ways to work around. There was an executive that I worked with years ago who had this great phrase. He called them artificial walls of reality. He said, almost every day I hear people talking about this constraint and that constraint, and you can't do this, we can't do that. And he says, like, why? Like, that's not written down anywhere. There's no reason why you can't do that. Certainly in some cases, those things are written down. And so in either case, one of my favorite things here, one of my biggest personal pet peeves is we will hire another program manager because product leader, sorry, it's just so complex. We can't tell you what all's involved. We can't tell you how this is all going to come together. Yes, we've got multiple teams from like multiple divisions that are working on this. You just don't understand. There's so much complexity involved in this. But yeah, we'll go hire another program manager so we can get you the insight you need. One of my favorite phrases is solving the wrong problem. Like, to me, that's a classic case of solving the wrong problem. And so I've only got 2 eye chart slides in the deck here. Here's the first one. What are some of the friction points? What are some of the quotes you hear that will help you sort of suss out where that's happening? Who might you likely hear that from? I'll be glad to send the slides to folks afterwards. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I have my LinkedIn QR code will show up again, and I will send you this and other things as well. So I had this prepared with the startup lens as well, because you're going to hear different things from a startup than you would in a larger enterprise. I only saw a couple of startup hands. And then for those of you, I guess I should probably have asked this question. I was trying to oversimplify. Did anybody not raise your hand for startup or enterprise because you consider yourself part of a scale-up? All right. Couple, okay. So yeah, it's really interesting, like as you go from startup to scale up, you start to hear some of the things that you'll hear in the enterprise. But from a startup perspective, there's different pressures, different tensions, different things that we're optimizing for. We just need to build it, customers will figure it out. An investor told us we really need to add this feature, those kinds of things. And so again, this is not for us to digest, but if you want the slides, here are some good examples of the kinds of things that you'll hear. And I've got a story that's actually from a scale up that I'll share here in a little bit. So the ultimate question and the whole purpose of this talk, though, is what role do you play? Are you complicit in perpetuating the dysfunction in your system? The sad truth is, in my journeys, and I've worked with easily dozens of product leaders in a number of different organizations, there tends to be a pretty high percentage of them that they come into the system and they just take it for what it is. They take those constraints as hard and fast truths. Certainly they may be frustrated, but I see very little action, very little effort taken in like trying to go change and improve the system. I had a client within the last couple of years where it was a Fortune 100 organization. They had a lot of the typical challenges around, pursuing greater agility. We'll just use that phrase. And in that division, they hired a new product leader from Amazon. And I got to spend a little bit of time with him when he started, and I kind of gave him the lay of the land. I'm like, here's the challenges, here's the things that are probably gonna get in your way. And he sort of had this, I would characterize it as naive stance on, well, if I just do my job as it's defined, then everything's probably gonna work out right. And there was no way. It's like what Amazon is optimizing for, like it's the whole context of the organization. What the product function is doing at Amazon is working in the context of Amazon. It's working in the architecture of Amazon's systems, right? It's working with the entire organizational structure and the performance metrics and the reward structures. And so this leader from Amazon got plopped into a situation where he was going to be pretty frustrated. Another pattern that we see a lot is, product leaders, like it's all about the process. It's like, well, like if we've got process issues, let's just clarify the process. Process is a part of your system. Process is not the only part of your system. You can do all you want with process if you don't address things like the structures, reporting relationships, the cultural aspects, as Pete covered in his talk. Like, where are those cultural tensions? A lot of times what we see is an over-rotation towards a control culture when the organization desperately wants to be more creative. And how do you balance that? You can't become more creative through process alone. And so in reflecting on the system and your role as a product leader, what I want to do is encourage you to think about these dimensions. And on the x-axis, as it were, is the desire for change. How much do you want to see change within your environment? And on the y-axis is, I just labeled it respect. It's respect for, could be respect for the system, could be respect for people generally. But the more you have respect for people and the system, and the more you desire change, then hopefully you're going to shift more into rule changer mode. From what I see way too many rule followers. I see a few rule challengers. I don't see a whole lot of rule changers. Definitely see some rule breakers from time to time, right? It's like strong desire for change, but low respect. It's like, I don't care, get out of my way, here's what I'm gonna do. Ideally, we wanna amp up the respect and focus on how do we change. And so in the context of the prompts, in the context of the quotes that I mentioned earlier, here's a prompt. And I created this prompt to get the answer to put in the slide. And then I thought, actually the prompt itself is gold, because try this, and the response it's pretty powerful because it gives you a lot of context around why this is the perfect prompt. The prompt is, what is the perfect prompt for a product leader to use with a quote they hear to diagnose likely dysfunction root causes? And take any one of those quotes, take a quote you hear, you'll be amazed at what you get back. It's pretty insightful. It's going to tell you, like, what are the biases that likely exist in your system? What are some of the things in your system that are keeping that in place? And it's pretty powerful. So that's why instead of sharing the result, I went ahead and shared the original prompt here. All right. So how do we go about shifting the system? I like this term, like system nudging. There's also this dynamic that it's sadly all too prevalent, where when we start to think about things like maybe process is kind of in play, like certain aspects of process we have the ability to change, maybe we can improve the process, but think about the rest of the system, the structures, who reports to who, the performance metrics, who's accountable for what, how does success get measured. All of those things are part of your system. You are not going to redesign, like if you're in operating model 3.1 for your company, you're probably not going to have a lot of success designing 4.0 and rolling that out. What we're talking about is, what's the smallest thing you can control? Look at what's being optimized for, ask the tension-revealing questions. And I've got a story where we're going to walk through this here in a minute. Find allies. Like that's your best chance, because let's face it, within every system, most of the things are the way they are because the people who are in the system are, a lot of them are comfortable, or at least they've figured out how to navigate this version of the system. And there's fear of change. There's fear that I'm going to lose control. I'm going to lose, the ability to hit my metrics. I once had a VP at a Fortune 100 company tell me, I don't care about all that other stuff. I just want to know what work the people that report up to me need to do, and I'll make sure it gets done. That is so fundamentally broken. And sadly, I think it's indicative of a lot of environments and a lot of leaders. They're like, this is complex. Just help me cordon off all the stuff that makes things too hard. Make my life simple so I can make life simple for the people under me. And if you look at it through that lens, everything might seem good and manageable and more simple. But when you look at it through the broader lens, the whole organization can't deliver anything. In that same context, we finally were able to convince him after a few months to at least try a new experiment. But they had certain capabilities that took them on average about 6 weeks to deliver, when it was about 4 hours worth of work, because this group had to touch it for 30 to 60 minutes, and then it had to go to this other group. And it's like, by the time you stack up multiple sprints, and we did the first hour, sprint 2, let's do the next hour, sprint 3, let's do the next hour. And we were able to at least identify an experiment to try and bring those skills together on one small team. It's pretty mind-breaking. So we want to use product thinking on the product function itself. Like, how do we really, when we think of it through the product lens, it's like, what problem are we trying to solve? What are we trying to optimize for? What's the impact we're trying to make for our customers and our users? Like, how do we improve our system to be able to do that as well? And so I'm going to tell a story about how we did exactly that. I love this quote. The board said yes, the customers didn't. So I worked with a client. It was about 6 months after this story had played out. And I'll tell you what happened and then what we did. So what happened was, the year prior, before I started working with them, they had identified a pretty sizable opportunity, and it became known as the $5 million opportunity. They had something that they were going to build into, extend an existing product that was already pretty well entrenched in their client base. And internally, they built a really robust business case. They did all the ROI. They mapped it all out, and they basically determined, okay, going into this next year, if we build this thing the first half of the year, and the investment was about 12% of their entire technology budget. If we build this thing in the first half of the year and launch it on July 1st, we will get $5 million by the end of the year. So they spent all their time on the business case. Once the business case got approved, that was the last anybody thought about the business case. It literally became known as the $5 million opportunity, right? It's a lock. The business case was super robust. It was amazing. It was the best business case we've ever seen. Everybody cheered. We had cake, right? Like, let's go build this thing. And so the whole focus for the first 6 months of the year was build what we have defined per the business case. Make sure that we hit our delivery date. And guess what? They did. Hooray, right? And so it's launched, and as time's going by, they're watching the metrics and looking for sales, and they've got very few opportunities in the pipeline for this new capability. And they get to the end of the calendar year, 6 months later, and they had $0 in new sales for this thing that they spent 12% of their budget on. Why? Why did they do that? It's because the board said yes. Every time there was a board review, one of the top questions was, how's progress on the $5 million opportunity? Are we on track? Are we on schedule? Are we on budget? We're going to deliver it with quality? Yes. Double down on all those things. And customers had a different perspective. The solution ultimately, it was a blend of, it was a little bit too complex, but it also didn't exactly solve the problem that was the real problem that the customers needed to solve. And any Marty Kagan fans in the crowd? I like Pete's. It's like, he makes some good points. The notion of value risk. Like, what were they optimizing for? They were optimizing for a robust business case. They were optimizing for a consistent delivery process that could build what was defined. Nowhere in what they were optimizing for was the notion of value risk present anywhere. It was basically, once the business case was approved, nobody's even thinking about value risk at that point. So what did we do? I'm going to go back a slide. Spot what's being optimized for. So that was the first call out, is basically what I just said. Here are the things you're optimizing for. Let's talk about the notion of value risk. What does value risk mean? How do you enable your process and your system to account for value risk? One of my personal taglines, I should probably put it on a slide, is stop building the wrong thing sooner. If you have a system that's optimized to stop building the wrong thing sooner, you are going to focus on value risk. You're going to focus on how do we get fast feedback? How do we understand before we spend 12% of our budget this year, how do we understand that we should pivot, or maybe we should just kill the thing altogether? And so we had a conversation with the COO, who was one of the co-founders, around, tell us about how these board reviews go. Like, what's the conversation? What are you doing? And they had a dashboard, and it was a pretty typical classic legacy kind of a dashboard. You know, here are the initiatives, and like here's the outcome that we're trying to deliver. Like, what's the operating impact that we're after? What's the status of it? And what we ultimately did was we added an icon. A very simple icon. We took the cone of uncertainty and we created 4 versions of it that basically showed which quartile of this concept of a cone of uncertainty are we in. Are we all the way outside the cone of uncertainty, or are we all the way at the narrow end of it? And that simple thing that we added completely changed the conversation in the board level reviews. We went from, how's the $5 million project tracking? Are we going to meet the schedule? To, why is the $5 million opportunity in this first quartile of the cone of uncertainty? That's where we've got the most unknowns. What needs to be true for us to move this thing through the cone of uncertainty? Where do we have assumptions that we haven't proven or disproven? What are the, have we put anything in front of a customer or a prospect to get their feedback? And that one very simple thing that we changed on the board report completely changed the conversation in the board reviews. So that's one way, and literally it was an icon on a report, but it changed the conversation, and it also changed the behaviors within the organization. So I'm going to go back real quick. I'm going to go back all the way to here. And what I want to do is encourage, I know we've got a bunch of folks on the Zoom, right? And so if you're on the Zoom, I want you to think about this yourselves. If you're in the room, I want you to pair up with somebody, if you're so inclined. Again, zoomed out. This process of taking ideas, evaluating ideas, figuring out which ideas we're going to invest in. Even if you're a solopreneur, that happens, right? If you're just one person in a business, you still have an idea to investment subcycle there. You have to decide what you're going to invest your time in. If you're in an enterprise, it's probably more rigorous around what are we going to allocate budget to. But I want you to talk about in your context, or if you're a consultant or a coach in the context of a current client or even maybe a recent client, what is the one thing that is present in that system for being able to move more effectively from idea to impact? So go ahead. We'll take 2 minutes. I want you to think about and share, and then I want to hear a little bit from some of what comes up for you all. 2 minutes. So the prompt is, in taking an idea and actually delivering it with the desired impact, where do you have the most friction? All right, we'll wind down the conversation. So one of the things, I was just talking to Jonathan and Ash down here, and Ash, we didn't have time, but he was also he was talking about everything from build to impact. One of the things that I see that is sadly missing from and there's a reason there's the launch to impact cycle here, is so many organizations, it's like, this is the goal. It's like, sure, we have a business case that talks about this, but everything inside the system is rewarded for this happening. And where's our instrumentation, our telemetry to help tell us, like, for example, in the story I told earlier, subsequently, they hired somebody who is probably one of the smartest humans I've ever met. Her name is Robin Upton, and she actually comes from a research science background. So they hired her, and she was like their product telemetry and instrumentation person. So like she comes at it from a research scientist perspective. If we expect $5 million, what are the behaviors that we would see? Like, she could literally tell you within the first week after that thing launched what your trajectory was. It's like, we're on a trajectory to $0 at 6 months from now versus what they did previously. So I'd love to hear, what are some of the most prevalent or most, as Jonathan said, like heartfelt maybe tensions that show up in your environments? We got one right here. Oh, no, go. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Oh, this works. I chose build to launch because in the particular situation I am in now as a product owner, there is competition among our resources that are spread to different projects for the same system. But more painfully is that there's a lead engineer who is competitive and continues to want to dominate the actual lead engineer who has been appointed the assignment.
That's fun.
Very awkward.
Yeah, and your story reminds me, not exactly, but I actually heard of a case where there was a pretty strategically important initiative, and it was in a Fortune 100 organization where they're probably 90th percentile in terms of the complexity of how the funding allocation and like having time codes and hours available to do work, like how all that works, like is off the charts, crazy complex. And my comment to them was, do you understand how many dollars you are spending tracking pennies? But they had a strategic initiative that like stalled out for like the better part of a week because the QA team ran out of hours in their bucket and that code hit zero and they had to stop working on it. It's like, what are we optimizing for here? Jonathan.
So we're working in a Fortune 30 company. We have process for everything. So even getting things to the left side of the table is very difficult because there's so much that has to happen to get the ball even moving. But then once the ball is moving, it then becomes impossible to stop the ball. So even if you get to the point where you've built something and you're launching it, no one stopped to ask for a long time, is this still valuable? The important thing is just to get it done at that point.
And as we were talking during the breakout there, the question I asked Jonathan is, who is incentivized to raise their hand and say, we should probably stop doing this?
No one.
This project needs to end. Nobody should spend another hour. Like, you're putting yourself in serious jeopardy. And the system is not like, how do we build that into the system, right? And it's one small step at a time. What's one small thing we can do to encourage people to raise, like, where is there a showstopper? Where do we have a blind spot? Like, how do we incrementally build towards, at some point, we might just need to say, you know what, sunk cost is sunk cost, and we're just going to keep throwing good money after bad, you know. Sometimes it's a hard pivot. Sometimes it's a kill decision.
Definitely.
Yeah, Ash?
We got a comment from Darian online. The biggest friction usually happens between investment to build and build to launch. Ideas to get approved, but why gets fuzzy. We're often rushed into delivery without revalidating the problem.
Yeah.
So we optimize for speed instead of value.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like we had this good idea, you know, we framed it well, but I think that's just another lens on, I'm probably going to forget these four, but Marty calls out 4 kinds of risk, right? There's value risk, there's usability risk, there's viability risk, and feasibility. Thank you. Feasibility risk. And it's like, if we're not looking at all 4 types of risk, like, it might be perfectly usable, but is the value there? Is it really, it's like, sure, functionally, like, it does a thing, but is the thing something that I would spend money to go solve this problem? Or it's like, no, like, I've got a super easy workaround, it's no big deal, right? Like, sometimes you get these, I know what we need to do, and if you don't validate it, it can be a killer. All right, thanks. Ash.
Yes, so kind of building up on some of the things already said, some of the friction I've seen over the last 20 years working for different corporations in finance, insurance, system automation happens build to launch and launch to impact. And the friction being using your $5 million opportunity project, the very people who justified the business case and approved it and moved it to the development, when it goes to the development and engineering teams and other teams work on it, we promote the value of fast feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and demo after every sprint or after do the system demo. But who actually shows up to those demos? The very same people who approve that business case, not the true stakeholders, the customers who will be using it.
Yeah.
So you're going through this false notion of, well, we are demoing, we are getting feedback loop, not asking who is actually giving the feedback.
It's an echo chamber, right?
Echo chamber. Just to go out after using your example again in 6 months and see nobody's using it.
Mm-hmm.
Which takes us to the last one, launch to impact. How many times have we completed the project? We celebrated because we had a low lead time or low cycle time, and we finished on time within the budget. And we perceived delivering value just to not get that final feedback from the field and give it back to the engineering team and people who worked on it.
Yeah,
so we can
that's
learn and
huge.
grow.
That's huge. Love it. So I'm going to put Pete on the spot, which I know there's really no such thing. But Pete, anything you would add for? Seems like maybe 2/3-ish of the room was not in your talk. So anything you would add on tensions, most prevalent ones, most damaging ones that you see?
Is this on? The conversation we had on the front end of that, which is we can't even prioritize what to work on and the tension, the fight that happens at the front end.
Sure.
And so we starve the system with the wrong things or with nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge one. And it all starts with, do we have a shared understanding of what value even is, right? Like if so many systems don't have clarity on what value is, and it creates that dynamic that Pete just mentioned, right? It's like, well, everybody's got their own view of what value is. Do those things all accidentally line up and deliver the greatest possible impact, or are we just sort of running in a bunch of fragmented directions? All right, thanks for participating. All right, I'm going the wrong way here. Let's see. All right, so the punchline is the real product is the system. I'm here to tell you that you can ignore the system, you can acquiesce to the system, you can take everything around you that feels like it's making your job harder as that's just the way it is around here. But ultimately, that's probably the most important part of your job. Doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be the most time that you're spending in your job. But if you're not spending any time driving the right conversations, trying to find where can you build alliances, where can you do, again, it's about doing the small things that are within your control. And when you need to do something that's maybe a little bit more than what's in your control, do the smallest thing that you can get approval to start to stretch those boundaries. And speaking of stretching boundaries, one of the things that I would be remiss if I didn't talk about, but we have a number of folks in here who are in enterprises. And in the enterprise context, the product function has like a ton of reliance on, other sibling functions and departments. And so my call to you, did anybody go to David's AI talk earlier this morning? I was talking to David over breakfast, and if you've got the opportunity to watch the replay of it, I definitely would. But, yeah. How can you as product, how can you sort of extend the fence? How can you not be as reliant? How can you do things? Any Clairvaux fans in the crowd? If you're in product and you're not watching Clairvaux on podcasts and on YouTube, you are seriously handicapping yourselves. She is blazing a lot of trails, but her biggest concept is like how do we take the product leader and just make them like the super-powered product leader? And she talks about the stuff that she's doing with AI, and she gives specific examples and use cases. And she's doing exactly that. She is extending the boundaries of what product is doing and can do so that she's reducing her reliance on other departments, right? If she can use AI to come up with a preliminary design of something, sure, like UX needs to do stuff, but hopefully that makes UX's job easier. She can create much greater clarity if she can spin up a prototype using AI tools than if she wrote the perfect, 380 words in a PRD. things like for technology as well, being able to move those fences back is a really huge opportunity. All right, I got to figure this out. So I'll close before we go into Q&A with this. Your job isn't just to ship products, it's to improve the system that ships products. That's the punchline. And so my question to you is, what's in your way, and what's your first move to shift it? I want to hear your answers. I'll go ahead and kind of officially close, and we'll go into Q&A here. But the thing that hits me is the more organizations and the more product leaders that I work with, like, I'm mad on their behalf. Like, I'm mad that they're having to deal with this crap. Like, you shouldn't have to deal with this crap.
I'm not going to take this anymore.
That's what I think. And so it's all about the system. And as a product leader, as somebody who cares about the product function, if you're not a product leader, we have to look at the system. We have to figure out how to make the system better. And so we'll go into Q&A mode. I want to hear some questions, but I also want to hear what next steps came to mind for you as we went through this talk together. Thank you very much. I welcome connecting on LinkedIn. DM me. I will send you the assets. I will send you the handout if you didn't get one, if you want a digitized copy of it. I'll send you the deck. But yeah, I welcome any connections. So what do you all got for me?
When you say system, are you referring like the product development life cycle, the process that kind of guides? And so I usually look at sort of two orthogonal cases, right? The product you produce, right?
Right.
Is it good or bad? And then the system by which it was produced, right? Are you talking that second part? So that you have the repeatability, the ability to understand how you achieve that success. Help us understand what you mean by system.
Yeah, no, it's funny because one of the last changes I made to this slide was I took the slide out that said what a system is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know what a system is, but I'm trying from your context. Is it the product development life cycle kind of mechanism?
From my context, it's more than that. Okay. Because most product development life cycles that I see a lot of them start after the investment decision is made. So your mileage may vary. Some of them might say, how do we take any and all ideas? How do we define what value is? How do we take all these ideas and run them through a filter to say which ones we predict will deliver the most value? Right. I would hope that that's part of it. But when I say system, the pieces that are often lacking are things like, and I'll call out some specific, archetypes maybe, if you will. I often see the VP of PMO who may not have the depth of experience in what a really good agile product environment looks like. And they've got some legacy beliefs and approaches that they're clinging on to. And you know what? They're super savvy. They're super smart. They're awesome in conversations with the board. And they steer the damn conversation in the wrong direction every chance they get, and they don't even know it. That's one part of what your system is. So our example with the $5 million opportunity, if you've got the VP of the PMO who the COO trusts and they're their right-hand person, and they bring them into the board level reviews and they're driving the scope, budget, schedule conversation, and they're super polished, that's dangerous.
So you're broadening it to the company level, how the company delivers value to its customers ultimately. That's the whole system, I suppose, right?
Yeah, it's who's in what seat on the bus? Do you have the right people in the right seats? Like, what biases show up? How is performance measured? You know, what does that VP of PMO need to do to be judged as successful? Like, sadly, in all too many cases, that $5 million opportunity, the PMO leader could be like, hey, great job this year. What are we doing?
Have you, so if you're familiar with DORA or the kinds of research are done for DevOps, right? Is there something equivalent of what are some of the behaviors companies have that are successful in producing the outcomes of good products from a product management hat perspective, kind of mimicking the research that was done specifically for the DevOps?
That is a great question. I'd say I have more opinions than succinct answers. But connect with me on LinkedIn and send me a message and let's talk. I'd love to dig into that. Anybody got a next step that comes to mind? It's like, as soon as I walk out of here, I'm emailing that person and we're gonna have this out. Down here.
Okay.
The cube
I always
says.
wonder how far away this thing needs to be. Some of what you referred to, legacy thinking, is interesting in that we look now, the half-life of a Fortune 100 company is less than 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? And that was, 15 years ago when
Yeah.
I heard that.
Yeah.
The half-life of skills and information, similar, 5 years.
Yeah.
Everything we think we know, half of it is worthless now.
Yeah.
The pace is only changing.
Yeah.
If there is anything that is a next step, it's like we have to understand the short amount of time we have, the time with the product perhaps that we come up with, that there are going to be diminishing returns when the next apex predator says, I can get into that market. So is there one thing to pay a lot of attention to? Is changeability.
Love it.
The ability to learn pretty much trumps everything else. And if
Yeah.
we're not building a system that can do that well, I don't know that we have a lot of prospects very far in the future.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I work with clients and like, how sad is it? Sorry, I think it's pretty sad. But we're in a fairly big conversation. There's about 20-ish folks. And somebody from the client says, who can take notes during this meeting? And I said, isn't that what AI is for? Like, why is anybody taking notes in a meeting? Like, I get it. Like, some people need that. Like, sometimes it's like, that's how I focus, that's how I process. Cool, right? But, if somebody wants to do that, great. And then, the next question is, how are you all using AI in your engineering efforts? It's like, we're not. It's like, I probably know enough about your business, and I know a couple of guys, and we could probably like disrupt you in like, certainly in 6 months, if not faster. So, yeah, like, this is all a wake-up call. Like, if you're a product leader and you're in that organization, it's like, you better not just be acquiescing and being okay and just saying, well, that's outside of my control, because you might not have a product to lead before too long. Anybody else? Questions? I really would like to hear any next steps. I want to hear somebody say, on Monday, I'm going to go have this conversation, and we're going to figure this out once and for all. Or at least we're going to start the conversation. Right? Just start. That's all you got to do is start the conversation.
I think I've never really thought of the process as the product. So for me, as a Scrum Master RTE, I've worked on improving organizational agility and removing impediments, making it more lean, most of my life at this point in time. But even though I've got a PMO group that documented the high-level process, no one in the company has, the detailed process of how everything fits together at the system product level.
Yeah.
So my next step is documenting it, and then from that going back to how do I make it leaner, meaner?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I mean, 'cause I'm sure all of us, regardless of role, like sadly we probably see it multiple times a day, but I would imagine it's at least once or twice a week that you see something and you're like, that decision hasn't been made yet, right? Or like action hasn't been taken on that yet. We got 2 minutes left. One of my favorite stories that I like to use to refer to, I don't use it as much because he's become a little bit of a political firebrand, but this was back in, I think it was 2018. Somebody tweeted Elon Musk, hey, at the San Bernardino park and ride, there are people that are just parking their Teslas and taking the bus and just leaving them charging all day in that spot when, that's, I can't charge. And it was, I'm trying to remember, I think it was right about a week after this tweet that they implemented something that was like some kind of a punitive overcharge if you left it plugged in and charging. Within a week, it went live. And like I ask most of my clients, I'm like, how long would it take you to schedule the first meeting to talk about that? Like, it's probably best case in most organizations, it's 2 weeks. Because you look at the leader's calendar, right? And it's like, well, we got to have these 5 people in 2 weeks. It's like, come on, what are we doing?
Hey, Randy, one last comment from Zoom. Darian, speaking of next steps, what's the smallest first move Scrum Master or Agile Coach can make to nudge a system that is prioritizing delivery over discovery, especially when they don't own the roadmap?
Ooh, that's a good question. What is the best next small step a Scrum Master could take to nudge a system that's optimizing for delivery over discovery? I think it's simply asking the question in the right way with the right audience, what if, and I'm at time, but like, what are the assumptions that if they're wrong would torpedo the value of this thing we're working on? And at least get them to articulate the assumptions. Hopefully they can. If they can, then you say, what have we done to prove or disprove it? Because like that's really at the core. Like if we're not looking at our assumptions and actively going about and being happy and celebrating whether we prove an assumption right or prove it, hooray, we proved it wrong. We can stop working on this thing. It was going to just keep costing us money with no benefit. So that would be my answer to that. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Want to remind you on the back of your badge to scan the survey and fill those out. Thank you.